I've been married for a little while. It was time to switch it over. So Catherine Witcher, Catherine Call, same person. I'm so excited to be here with you today. As mentioned, I am the founder of the Master IEP Coach Mentorship. Today, I'm going to bring you one of the tools that I use inside of the Master IEP Coach Mentorship. The Master IEP Coach Mentorship is where I teach parents, teachers, admins, and therapists to become Master IEP coaches so they then can work one-on-one with families and help guide families through the IEP process. That's what I've been doing for a very long time. As mentioned, I do have a brother who has Down syndrome. So I grew up in the disability community watching my family advocate. I became a special education teacher. I got a bachelor's degree, got a master's degree. I went all in. And when I went into the system, I was like, oh, okay, this is why my brother's teachers were struggling to really serve him at an appropriate level for what he needed to be prepared for his future. So I ended up teaching by day, coaching parents by night, and eventually spent my time coaching parents. But an interesting thing happened as I was coaching parents through IEPs. I went to one IEP meeting in particular. It was pretty sticky, and we get through some pretty tough conversations. And as I walked out to my car, an admin that was at the meeting came running after me in the parking lot. Now my heart starts beating because I'm thinking, oh my goodness, like what's going on? And her first question to me is, who do you work for? And I thought, oh my goodness. And I said, well, myself. And she says, oh, you just work for yourself? Great. Can you come in and train my staff on how to build IEPs the way that you just taught us at this IEP meeting? And I said, yes, I would love to. And that's where I started training teachers also. So I've worked nationwide with families, with school districts in all different ways to help build IEPs that truly prepare a child for further education, employment, and independent living. Now, with that, again, as I mentioned, I'm bringing you a tool from behind the scenes inside of our Master IEP Coach Mentorship. And this is a tool that Master IEP coaches use to support their clients. That's my job tonight. My job is to support you. Now, we don't have time to go through all of the nitty-gritty of all of the points. You'll see what I'm talking about when I start to screen share there. But I want you to know, if you are here live, please, as mentioned earlier, please use the chat box. I want to make sure that you get your questions answered and that I'm addressing you directly. If you are watching the replay, there's a link wherever you are watching this, and you can reach out right through my website. There's a contact Catherine. Just go ahead and send me your question there, and I'd be happy to answer that for you. So with that, let's go ahead and break out this tool and get started with our IEP development wheel. I'm just going to give me a second to pull up the chat box here just to make sure. If you are here live, and if you could just pop into the chat box and let me know what age is your child who has an IEP, or if you are a professional at the table, tell me your current role at the IEP table. That will help me just know who is in the room, and it will help me guide the conversation. So this Master IEP Coach IEP Development Wheel, again, was developed because of my work for decades, and I wanted to put something together that would truly help Master IEP coaches find all the gaps inside of the IEP. So what I'm going to be talking about tonight is not your standard IEP advocacy. This is what we are looking for. This tool is going to help us find what we're looking for in the real world to really figure out what is missing from an IEP. And let's see, Danielle, can you just make sure that the chat is open? I just want to make sure that nobody's having any difficulties with that. I can see, actually, they're in the Q&A. That's fine. I can do the Q&A here too, because now I can see some answers. I knew that. I see in the Q&A. Yep, got it. All right, so we're going to use the Q&A. Got it. All right. I see 8, 8, 7, 8, 11. Fantastic. Okay. Really helpful. 10, 8. Got it. Thanks for popping in there, guys. Love it. Okay. All right. So I kind of have an idea of who's here. I will make sure that you get a copy of this workbook that we're going to go through today, because I'm going to go quite quickly. And now that I know who is in the room, again, please, You slow me down. You say, wait, tell me more about that. Wait, that's not what my school told me. Wait, that's not the experience that I had. I want you to go ahead and stop the conversation where you need to. Now, this workbook here, I have put a little warning in the workbook like, hey, this workbook is pretty useless if you don't have the video training that goes with it. Okay. So it's really important that I'm going to walk you through what is possible to find. First, I want to know a little bit too. Where do you feel like you're at? I have a level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let me know, where do you feel like you're at? Do you feel like you have very little foundational knowledge about IEPs? Like you're new to the process and you're just figuring out all the jargon and what's going on? Like you feel like everything's upside down and you need to figure out how to get everything going in the right direction? Or are you a level 2 where you know your child or your student needs something different, but you don't know what? Like, hey, this isn't working, but I don't really know what I need, but I don't think this is really working. Or do you feel like maybe you're at a level 3 where you've tried to ask for new things in the IEP? You're like, I've got all these ideas and I'm going to the team, but the team is saying no. You hear no more than you hear yes. Are you a level 4 where you hear yes more than you hear no, but you're really emotional through the process still? Like you have to get pretty kind of like fired up to get those yeses, or you're losing sleep the night before, like a lot, or you're crying in the car after the IEP meeting, even if you've heard yes, just because it's so stressful. Are you a level 4? Or are you a level 5? You know how to stretch the resources. You know how to achieve a free and appropriate public education. And you're just here, you're growing your knowledge because you just want to take this as far as you can with your knowledge. So I love that. Thank you. 3s, 2s, 4s. Love seeing that in there. Level 2. So I just want you to know, no matter what level you're at right now, just know these levels exist for a reason. Again, I've been doing this for decades. And I have clients come in at all different levels. And so don't feel like you're alone. If you're hearing more no's than yeses, you're not alone. If you feel like you don't know, right side up, upside down, that you're not alone. If you don't even know what your child needs different, okay, like you're not alone. So this is the IEP development wheel. There are 8 sections and there are 5 checkpoints in each section. When I'm going through a document and when I'm teaching coaches to go through a document, we go through each section: the parent input, present levels, goals, accountability, support, services, placement, and collaboration. And we start in the middle like a bullseye. And everybody gets to color in this 0 here, this little piece of the pie down here. And then we check things off by coloring in each section of this wheel. By the end of this, and we have the IEP sitting next to us. That's why I said you're not going to be able to complete the full thing because we would have to flip through the IEP at the same exact time as going through this. Okay, so we're not going to flip through the IEP. I'm going to give you the touch points, the highlights in each one of these areas that I want you to look at when you think about what needs to happen next for your child or for the students that you work with. What needs to happen next? I'm going to give you some of those steps. So let's go ahead and just set the foundation here that we're not looking for a perfect IEP. I am not one that's going to go through every little talking point of the law and kind of play gotcha with an IEP like, oh, this is wrong, gotcha. Oh, this is wrong too, gotcha. That's not what I do with IEPs. When I'm looking at an IEP, I'm looking at quality over quantity. I'm looking at effective IEPs don't have more things, they have the right things. We don't need to jam pack an IEP with so many things and say, okay, now it's better. A lot of times when I'm working with clients or I'm teaching coaches to work with clients, we're looking at how to simplify an IEP so we can actually see results. I'm also looking for foundations over fancy. Anybody ever read an IEP and it just sounds like a ton of jargon? And you're not really sure exactly what's supposed to be going on. And I'm not just talking to the parents. And parents, you should know that. A lot of professionals, myself included, we can pick up IEPs and go, huh? Like, what was this person really trying to say here? We're also looking for progress over perfection. Again, if the goal is written well, notice I didn't say perfect, but if the goal is written well and we can measure that the child's making progress, that's really important. It's important for you to know that this is the perspective that I'm taking looking at the IEP because I want to see the maximum amount of progress with the least amount of stress on the child and on the team, right? So that's the quality over quantity, foundations over fancy, and progress over perfection. An IEP should always be focused on, I've already kind of slipped this in here a couple of times. It should always be focused on further education, employment, and independent living. That's actually in the purpose of IDEA law. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I can't give you legal advice. I can tell you that I use this purpose of IDEA law as the foundation of everything that I teach. Every time I've sat at an IEP table with a parent, every time I've trained an entire school district and I'm working with their general education teachers and their service providers and their, special education teachers, we start here. You'd be amazed if this is the first time you're going to hear what I'm going to say next. You'd be amazed. Many teachers, admins, therapists, those who have been in the field for a very long time have never really focused and dialed in on this piece of the law. And this makes this perspective that we're working from extremely unique, because not only are we looking to provide FAPE, a free and appropriate public education, but we are looking to make sure that the IEP is designed to meet a child's unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. Again, that's in the law. So anybody ever see an IEP? Maybe it's your child's, maybe you're a provider, so it's the students you work with, and you see an IEP goal in there, and you're like, why? Like, why are we working on this? And the real question is, does it align with further education, employment, and independent living? And if the goal does not align with further education, employment, and independent living, then we really need to rethink that goal. And we'll address some more about goals in the future. Get ready tonight. You might learn some things that are going to cause some uncomfortable conversations. So I've got some encouragement for you there. And let's go ahead and start jumping into this parent input section. In case you didn't know, there's a section in every IEP for parent input. Most of the time it's called something like parent educational concerns. And with parent educational concerns is the place where we can really get a parent's voice. Never should that be left empty. But I'll tell you, often is left empty. Or it says something like, the parent has no concerns at this time. Now, I told you, I'm a special needs sibling and I've been in the field a really long time. I have never met a parent who has zero concerns about their child who has an IEP, like zero concerns. Typically, what that tells me is that an IEP meeting happened. We got to the end of the IEP meeting. They said, hey, Miss Jones, do you have any other questions for us or concerns for us? And the amount of information overload that has happened, Miss Jones just says, no, not at this time. Like, we're just done with that conversation. When we do parent input in the way that I teach and the way that I always recommend, we're actually giving parent input prior to the IEP meeting, so it can be integrated not just into the IEP, but it can be integrated by the team into the goals and into the services and all of the things that are being considered. So what should be in this section? This parent educational concerns. And again, if you take nothing away from this session, if you just know the purpose of IDEA law that we just discussed, and you go to the parent input section and you realize like, oh, this needs to be different, you are like golden and making some key progress in advocating and really bringing the team together, of bringing a leadership style to the table, because that section is so important. And it's a way that we can, again, just put everybody together at the IEP table. So that parent educational concerns should contain concerns. Like, does it contain concerns? Remember, I told you I have that checklist, right? I just showed you the wheel. So everybody who has concerns in their parent educational concerns section or their parent input section, they get to color in that dot right there. Are there multiple domains addressed, such as I have reading concerns and I have social emotional concerns. I have reading concerns, math concerns. I have reading and communication. I have, do we have multiple domains? Or if there's only one area of concern, do we have a couple of things that we're concerned about, not just one thing kind of plopped in there? Do we know that the team has received the parent input statement, and has the parent input statement been acknowledged? So typically what happens is, you get that notification from the school that says, hey, there's going to be an IEP meeting in 10 days. I have parents write back and say, yes, we will be at that meeting on that day, and please see attached parental concerns. And then the team needs to acknowledge that. If that process didn't happen, did the teacher reach out and ask for parent input? Is there something happening for parent input being collected and acknowledged? Once that parent input is collected and acknowledged, I want to make sure that anything that the team is saying yes to, that we have an action plan for that, and that it's not pacified, that it's not like, oh yeah, we'll take care of that. Like, yes, here is our action plan of how we're going to take care of it. And if anything that the parent has been concerned about or is worried about, or has requested. And if they're hearing no at the IEP table, I want all no's documented. That's really important to have your yeses documented and your nos documented. That's one of the first things that master IP coaches learn, not just for themselves, because a lot are parents and teachers as they're getting started, but then for their clients, because once we have documented yes and nos, we can get out of that conflict, that of like he said, she said kind of conversations, or we didn't know kind of thing. So we have a documented. If you guys have questions about parent input, and if you've had any struggles with parent input, please feel free to put that into the Q&A, and I can look that over there. So overall, we want to make sure, what is the current process and what is our plan to change that process if needed to get to this end result with these 5 points in that area of parent concerns. I also put a little worksheet in here that really helps parents brainstorm. Can I give examples for input? Yeah, so examples for input could be something like, if my child's name is Michelle, I could say, as a parent, I'm going to say in a very formal letter, these templates and things that are used inside the Master IP Coach mentorship. Those are my exact letters that I've used for clients for years. And it typically starts out by saying like, thank you for your efforts in educating Michelle during this school year. Taking into consideration the current data, I have the following concerns. Bullet point, right? The gap in reading seems to be widening, and we need to make sure. And then I would have, based on, if my child has dyslexia, if my child has a speech delay, if my child has something, and then I might say, based on current data, I'm concerned about my child's math. I could say, based on the current data, I am concerned about my child's executive functioning skills. It could be about their morning routines at school, like they're always late to the first class because they're having trouble with the daily living skills of the backpack and the coat, like all of these things. So you can see here, we're going to list out anything academic, functional, concerns about communication, relationships, behavior supports, staff knowledge and resources, concerns about inclusion, or anything else. And it's really putting them in a formal letter that's bullet pointed. So I usually say no more than 3 to 5 concerns, like buckets of concerns that we then can say like, okay, if these 3 things got solved for my child's IEP, this would put us moving in the right direction. All right, let's go to present levels. Present levels, what I'm looking at here, and this is different ways, and this is something that is important to know, all the different ways that a team might be gathering data. That's where when I'm working in a workshop or we have IEPs in front of us and that we're looking at all the different ways and we're kind of jotting down ideas on how to take data. But I want to make sure that in the present levels of performance for every goal that we have verified that like there's data to support what the present level is, and it's not an opinion. We want to make sure there's actual data. We also want to make sure that the present levels listed for that goal is relevant. Here's the thing. There are many times that I've actually seen like kind of jumbled academic present levels, and then the goal wasn't even addressing one of those present levels. It was academic, but it wasn't necessarily addressing one of those. The other thing that we have to make sure, for example, it might say, let's say a child's working on counting and might say the child cannot count to 20. That leaves a lot of questions for me, right? Well, what can they count to and what supports have you used and what, like all of these questions would come up. So I want to make sure that a present levels of performance are very clear with data and that they're relevant to the goal that we're writing it for. We also want to include any resources that are used. Like, are there, are we using an iPad? Are we using flashcards? Are we using verbal prompts? Oh, and that's the next one. So verbal prompts, are we using, physical prompts? Are we using, visual prompts? Like, what are the materials that are used and what is the prompting that is being used? And I also want to see like, how does the student thrive? Like, what are the student's strengths? So if I was to take this present level of performance, basically I could look at it and it's an exact recipe of what I need to get the exact result from that child. So, whatever materials I need, whatever prompting I need to give, I should be able to look at it and say, like, okay. And then student strengths, it could be something too, like loves to talk about, a certain cartoon character or something like that. Like that's kind of stuff can even be weaved into a present level of performance. Although those preferences might change, it's a way for a teacher who's going to see that IEP next year to be like, okay, if I gather these materials and I find what the child's motivated, they love to talk about this, they love to do this, maybe they love counting, certain objects that relate to something that they like. But if you give them a worksheet, it's not going to work. Like they're not going to count. So that happens very often. In fact, that happened to my brother even way back many, many, many decades ago with that. And that's one of the reasons that I get very specific about this is because my brother could not do math on a worksheet, but he loves sports. So he could watch a basketball game and add by ones, twos, and threes really quickly. So he knew who was winning and who was losing when it came to that. So those are kind of things that would be in present levels of performance. All right, let's talk about real world IEP goals. This is really close to my heart. It's something that I don't like to see any child's time wasted, nor do I like to see staff time wasted on goals that are not truly going to be important for further education, employment, and independent living. So my first thing when I'm looking at IEP goals, I see, are they real world relevant? And this is how I use my own criteria for that. So real world relevant to me means I don't know what a child's potential is, right? Like I don't know where they're going, and I'm never going to make assumptions of what is possible and what is not possible. But if I'm looking at a goal and I don't use that skill myself as an adult, most likely the child's not going to use that skill. I'll give you an example. And this is one that if you know anything about me, if we have worked together at any point, if you've listened to the podcast, if you've done any of my programs, I talk about this all the time. If I could take pennies, like quarter, nickels, dimes, pennies, like if I could take that out of a child's IEP, all IEPs basically, yes, I would be so excited because I don't go to the store and count pennies anymore. You can't buy anything with pennies. You can receive change. And yes, you need to understand money. Yes, you need to know budgeting. Yes, you need to know a rounding up method. Yes, you need to know how to, I got $10 in my wallet or $10 on my debit card, or I have a $10 limit on my credit card. Yes, you need to know all of those things. But too often, still today, a child's math proficiency or financial proficiency is being held up because a child can't count penny, nickels, dimes, and quarters. And I'm like, that's not relevant to our future right now. Like that's a bonus. So I'm not saying that a child can't learn it. What I'm saying is it should never be the lowest barrier for like getting in to learning higher level math is that we have to master coins first. Can we all agree on that, right? We do not need to master coins. There are so many different ways to teach money management, to teach the value of money, to teach all of those things. All of it is important. I don't want to stop a child from learning because they can't do that skill. Okay, number two, I also want to make sure that the goals have a fresh start, meaning that many times you will see the same IEP goal over and over and over and over in a child's IEP for years and years and years. And if you had to go to work every day and work on the same project and you were failing at that project, you would hate going to work, wouldn't you? So that's where I say, let's give a fresh start. There's something else missing. There's some pre-teaching. There's some pre-skills. There's maybe we just need some more kind of maturity as in development for the child until they're ready to grasp onto those skills. Like, have you ever walked away from something that you're struggling with and you come back to it later and all of a sudden it clicks and you're like, oh, I got it. That was much easier than I thought. That happens to our children too. So sometimes we need to take a break, step back, and look at what else could we be working on. Of course, we need our goals to be SMART goals. I'm not going to teach about SMART goals tonight because that is all over the internet, all over ChatGPT, all over everywhere, right? Like, how do you write a SMART goal? You can learn that on the internet. But do we need to make sure that they are SMART goals? Yes, absolutely we do. Number 4 is burnout boundaries. That means for the staff and for the child, have we put, let's say, 10 goals into an IEP that are all extremely difficult? Again, If your work day was that you had to work on the hardest projects all day long from the time that you walked into school to to work to the time that you left, you would not like that place of work. Children need places to be leaders, followers, and equals. And it doesn't mean that we can't work on IEP goals. It means that we do not need to exhaust ourselves by making everything so challenging that we're just not even functional at the end of the day. For me, I say, oh, my brain feels mushy right after I've had a long day of like really working in the zone. And we don't want that for a child every day. So, how are we going to make sure that we're not having burnout for the child or for the staff, that we've really made this IEP doable in a way where we can integrate? Here's some math, here's some reading, here's some social skills, here's all of this, but we did it in a way that makes it feasible for the child. We also want to make sure that we've delegated duties. I don't know if you know this as parents. Our staff who might be here, who works in the school system, you know this. It tends that the entire IEP falls on top of the special education teacher at all times, and that's actually not how it's supposed to be. A child is a general education student first, who then receives special education services, and sometimes those services are received in a different location. But they are all a student of that community first, which means all the teachers that are, the general education teacher, the PE teacher, the art teacher, they're all responsible for ensuring that the IEP is implemented throughout the entire school day. This is something that when I stand up in professional developments in front of school systems, they're not really like happy when I say that. Like the gen ed teachers are like, oh, but we already have so much on our plates. And I'm like, so do the special education teachers, which is why we need to delegate things out so we can help make this, again, not just manageable, but make things achievable for the student by making sure that they are supported in all environments and that it's not dependent on one person to have the IEP implemented. All right, let's move on to accountability. For accountability, this is a big piece. You can see here that I have a list of all of the people who are required to be at an IEP. So one parent, one LEA representative, that means a decision maker for the district, a general education teacher, if applicable, a special education teacher, and then somebody who can interpret the results of any assessments. Do you notice who's not listed on there? Therapists. And there's many other people that could be on an IEP team that they're not listed. Now, if they have assessments that they need to interpret and they're the only ones that they can interpret, then they would fall under number 5. But it is important for you to know who is required to be there. Also know that you don't need to wait for the entire IEP team to be available to have an IEP meeting. There are forms that parents can sign that you can excuse people. So let's just say that you need some changes made in the IEP, but there's a team member that it's not really necessary for them to be there. You can excuse them from the IEP meeting. And a lot of times that can help an IEP meeting happen sooner. The other thing is that it's not mandated by federal law that there has to be a meeting to make changes in an IEP. You actually can kind of do a paperwork shuffle if everybody is in agreement. So again, something for you to know. When it comes to accountability, I always want to know who's doing what. You should be able to look through your child's IEP or student's IEP and everything that's listed. So if there's a goal, who's responsible for implementing that goal? Who's taking the data? If there's a service that's being provided, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in another section there, but I always want to know who is doing what. I've sat at many IEP meetings where we've come up with beautiful plans, like behavior support plans that are comprehensive. They took 3 meetings to get them all together. And we get to the very end of the meeting, and I'm thinking of a situation very specific. This happened, and I will never forget it. We get to the end, and I had the special ed director there, and he turns to me, and he basically looked at me like, "Are you happy?" Right? I've been helping the parent through, and I always do things in a collaborative way. I have such respect for everybody at the IEP table. Collaboration doesn't mean that that you're a pushover. Collaboration means that there's some give and take and understanding, and how are we going to get to the best end result, right? Okay, so special ed director looks at me like, are you good? I'm like, yes, we love this plan. Mom loves this plan. But I have a question. Who's going to implement it? And the district was like, well, the team's going to implement it. Well, I knew that meant that the teacher's going to implement it, but the plan that was developed required much more than just the teacher to implement it. I also knew the teacher did not have the capacity to implement that plan by themselves. So after a little while of discussion and some back and forth, it turns out, the speech therapist and the occupational therapist decided to team up. They put consult minutes into the IEP, and now that behavior plan was delegated out. So who's doing what? Are we delegating data? Again, if we want to see progress, we have to take a lot of data. And that means that we might need the help of somebody like a special education teacher, general education teacher. It could be a paraprofessional. How are we delegating out the data? Do we have an implementation plan for everything, from a safety plan to a behavior plan? Do we have implementation plans of, okay, we're going to work on this goal. This goal might be able to be, maybe a child receives 60% of their education in a special education room. However, one of the goals could absolutely be worked on inside the general education classroom. How are we going to make that happen? We would need an implementation plan. Do we have all the resources that are required? That means, like, do we have the curriculum? Do we have the supports? Do we have access to what we need? I walked into several classrooms as a teacher, and at like beginning of the school year, and I had nothing, like nothing. I had a stack of IEPs and I had nothing. And there was specific curriculum and different resources that I needed to implement the IEPs. And my story is not a unique story. When it comes to, remember, I train parents, teachers, admins, and therapists to become master IEP coaches, which means that I have worked with thousands of providers across the country, and this story is common. And you as a parent or you as a provider, you have a voice to help say, okay, if this is in the IEP, we need to make sure we have the materials to do so. I do see that somebody has mentioned here that the district has a policy that our son's aide is not included in any of our meetings. We're not allowed to have direct contact with her. It all has to go through the gen ed teacher. Is there a way around this? Seems like a loss since she's with him nearly 100% of the time and has the most data. Can we ask for her to be included? Here's the thing. I understand your perspective 100%, and I know why districts do that. So the paraprofessional is not necessarily responsible for implementation, right? The certified teachers are responsible for that. I have been in many disastrous situations where paraprofessionals have said very inappropriate things, okay? And I'm sure most districts have experienced this. To me, that does not mean that the input should not be given, but how it's given. Is there an alternative? Like, how can we work with the district to make sure that we're getting some direct information from the aide, especially if there's a specific area? So I have been able to get around that in saying things like, could we have a parent teacher conference with the aide there? Does the district need to be there? Can we send a questionnaire? We've done that too. Where they've said, nope, there's not going to be any meeting in person. Say, can we send a questionnaire to the paraprofessional and the paraprofessional can fill it out? Is it going to be skewed a bit because it's going to be looked at by other staff? Yes. So I understand the concern, and it is disheartening. There are some districts that allow the aides to speak directly with parents and come to meetings and pop in and all of those things. The majority, it's going to be no. So my thing is, how can we get the information that we need in a way that is okay with the district and gets you the information that you need? So it's about being more specific of what information are you looking for from this person, and how can we get that before or after the meeting? Okay. I also want to make sure that there's a parent connection in accountability, meaning that if you want a home to school communication plan, you can have that written into the IEP. So things like that the school will communicate with you on a daily or a weekly basis. I am going to encourage you that asking for just general communication most likely is not going to be meaningful for you, and it's going to be time consuming for the staff. So are there certain things that you as a parent, and if you're a provider or a teacher, are there certain things that you can ask the parent, like, well, what are you most looking for in the daily communication so I can get something together for you. So some parents care if their child ate their lunch that day. Like they're monitoring food intake, they're monitoring bathroom breaks. Other parents are like, I don't care. Like, don't even tell me about lunchtime. I know my kid's going to eat. And if they don't eat, it's because they're a picky eater and I'm going to serve them something else when they get home from school. They don't care. But what they do care about is did the child stay on task during reading class because they've been off task a whole lot? Or did they have any struggles? How many sensory breaks did they have to take that day? So there's a lot of different information. So make sure when you're looking for anything with home to school communication that you are really tailoring that. All right, let's talk about some supports. Here we go. In every IEP, there is a section where there's going to be supports. This can be accommodations and modifications. It's going to be support, just different ways. And usually it's checked boxes. Like a child can have extended time, a child can have preferred seating, a child can have these things, right? How are we going to go beyond the boxes? Because what I think is preferred seating is different than you. What I think is sensory break could be different than what you thought what sensory break was for the child. So how are we going to write details beyond the boxes? Anything that's a checkbox for supports, how are we going to make sure that the details are in the IEP? That is a huge one. A lot of times what will happen is this parent would come to me, they'd say, my child's not making any reading progress. And I would go to the support section and I would say, okay. I said, well, they're supposed to have their tests read out loud to them. Is that happening? Parent says, I don't know. Turns out it was just one of the many things where the boxes were checked, but it wasn't being followed through on. So when we take time to go through the boxes of how supports are going to be provided, and then we come up with a plan of what that looks like, and we really detail that out, now we get into that accountability, which is where we want to be. Also, this is a big one. There's a box on every IEP that says supports for school personnel or something similar to that. Supports for school personnel, again, or something similar to that. That is where we can check that box and make sure that all team members, not just special education team members, that all team members are trained in how they need to be trained in order to provide an appropriate education. So if your child uses a communication device and the only person they can talk to is the trained teacher, that's not helpful because your child needs to be part of the school community. We need to get more people trained on their device. Notice I skipped right ahead there to number 3, using that as an example. But it's because that happens all the time. Training plan, that could be a safety plan, a behavior plan. It can be how to implement a goal, how to do prompting. It can be anything for training, and parents can be included in the training also. The training must be related to a goal. So let's just say that it is something with assistive technology, which I'm going to talk about that even a different capacity in a minute, but something with assistive technology, and the parent needs to be trained on how to use this device. That can be part of the IEP. Now, I will tell you, and I always bring up this story because I know somebody at home is going to say, I don't see this box on the IEP, this supports for school personnel. In fact, I was standing up at a national conference teaching in a room full of administrators, and I go over this section and I was talking about the training plan for staff, and the admin busts out her computer, opens it up, and I went, oh my goodness. Like, I saw her. She was only 3 rows back, and I thought, oh my goodness, like she was on a mission. She raises her hand and she says, my district does not have that box. I just looked at all these IEPs. She had several IEPs, all these tabs open. She had several IEPs open. She says, they don't have this box. That's not true. And a national conference on stage, right? I said, would you do me a favor? Mind you, I didn't know this. I was kind of going in the dark here of like, oh, how is this IEP paperwork working in her school district? Because I know this. Like, I know this. I've been doing this. This is my career. Like, I know this. I said, could you open up a new IEP as if you have a new student? She opened up the new IEP as a new student. Again, conference is still going on because she was adamant. I said, open that up for this new student. I said, scroll over, and we scroll, and look. And I go, there's the box. I said, it probably has never been checked. So in the final copy, it's not showing. And sure enough, when she clicked that box and she saved the IEP, then it showed up in the saved one. She had never clicked that box. She was never taught how to use that box. This is an administrator who was never taught how to use that box. Now, here's the thing. I get it. She was actually not looking to call me out of like, you're wrong. She was just like, my district does not have this. Like, no way is this in everyone. Like, no way. Like, she wasn't looking to be combative. She honestly did not know. So just know that some of the things that I'm throwing out at you, rapid fire, I know, like I'm just throwing them out there to you of like, these are things that you need to consider for an IEP. Other people have never heard of them. So let's see, we said what training can be provided for behavior plans? Lots of different trainings. How do you know if an aide's been given training in carrying out a behavior plan? You have to have it documented. So training could be, how do you give prompts? How do you give consequences? How do you pre-teach skills? How do you, like, there's whatever's in that training plan. It needs to be, it could be, and here's the thing, training can be as simple as things being written out in a binder, and that the special education teacher sits with the aide and goes through, this is what the behavior plan is, and this is exactly how it should look. Let me show you how it looks. Let me demo with the student, or let me demo with you and share with you how should the prompting work, what should the language be, what should the supports look like. Assistive technology. When we think of assistive technology these days, we think of things like iPads or certain communication devices. We think of, Chromebooks and, maybe some, fun tech add-on kind of things to that. But assistive technology, according to IDEA law, is both high tech and low tech, and that term existed way before iPads. In fact, things like slant boards that, kids write on, like is at a slant, so their handwriting is a bit, it's to work their core and all of these other things. And so it's while practicing handwriting and learning how to handwrite, all of our OTs in the room would know how all of that is connected, but slant boards and pencil grips and Velcro and communication boards. So if your child uses like picture communication boards, all of that is considered assistive technology. If your child has anything high tech or low tech that is needed to help them access their day and access their curriculum and access their IEP and their education overall, that is considered assistive technology, and that box should be checked on the IEP. A lot of times, unless there's a high-tech device, that box is not checked, and I'm always very adamant to make sure that it's checked, because I want to make sure that when we go from one year to the next year, that all of the things follow the child. All right, we also want to make sure that any of the behavior or health plans are included into the IEP. We also want to make sure, now data collection, I'm not just talking about for goals. I'm also talking about for the supports. So if a child is supposed to receive sensory breaks, how often are they using the sensory breaks? If they're supposed to receive preferred seating, how often are they receiving preferred seating? Very important to know how often is a child using. Now, that doesn't mean we spend all day collecting data. We don't have to take the data necessarily every day, but we do need to have some at least snippets of how often these supports are being used. All right, let's talk about services. Important things to know. 5 checkpoints to know. Have we missed anything in the service section? Number 1, are all services listed? You'd be amazed how many times a social worker or a psychologist or even an OT or a PT are working with a child or giving consult minutes, and it's not listed in the IEP, but yet it has become a key part of a child being successful. That is very important that we have all services listed. So if anything's been happening during the school year that is not documented in the IEP when it comes to services, we need to make sure it's listed. Number 2, do we know how the service is being implemented? Do we know how it's being implemented? So a lot of times when we see speech therapy, we assume speech therapy is one thing, and then we find out it's another thing. We assume that reading support is one thing, but then it's another thing. So we have to make sure, is it small group, large group? What classroom does it take place? How often? Sometimes it says, oh, the child's going to receive 60 minutes a week. Is that one session or is that 3 sessions? I don't know. How is it being implemented? That actually can make a huge difference, because many times I'm not looking to increase a child's minutes of a service. unless it's necessary, meaning that I don't necessarily want to eat up more of the school day. Sometimes I need to look at what is currently being provided and can we do anything better during these minutes? Like, can we do a quality over quantity? Can we improve the quality of the current 60 minutes versus adding on another 30 minutes? Would it make more sense? So we'd see more progress. We also want to make sure that the minutes match, meaning whatever's listed in the IEP is actually happening during the school year. We want to make sure that the service is documented. So we want to make sure that what is happening, like service logs, are being documented. Also in the service areas, I want to talk just for a minute about ESY. ESY, extended school year, is often also called summer school. It's not the same. A lot of districts have summer school and they have ESY, two different things. Summer school, a lot of times it can be for general education students who do not have an IEP. ESY is for students who have an IEP. Extended school year is not a cookie cutter program. It should not be offered to you as in you have 6 weeks of ESY, 4 days a week from 8 to 12 in the morning, take it or leave it. That is not how ESY should be. ESY should be a customized program. It is an extension of the school year, which means that it actually can happen anytime during the year outside of typical school hours. So yes, sometimes ESY happens at different school breaks other than summer. Sometimes it happens during school, before or after school. ESY can be something very creative. I'll just name off a couple of creative things, and by no means am I saying that this should be offered to every child. Okay, do you guys hear me? You can't go to school tomorrow and say, this Catherine Call said that you have to offer me this. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is here are some creative solutions that we've had for ESY. We've had camps that are paid for that provided inclusive opportunities that could not be provided by the school during the summer. And the child really needed to be in an inclusive environment during the summer. We've had walk-in services so that the child just came in for, OT, PT, or academic support. We've had tutoring paid for by certified tutors that were certified in a specific method, such as like an Orton Gillingham type tutor. So tutoring, walk-in services, camps that are paid for, those are just a few of the creative ESY things that we have achieved. ESY is also not just for regression. There's actual several criteria. Again, you can message me about it. I can give you the link. I've got podcast episodes about it. I've got a blog about it. I've got information for you on that, but it is not just for regression. It can be if your child just learned a skill, and that skill would most likely disappear if we didn't practice it for the 8 weeks or 10 weeks over the summer. That could be a reason for ESY. And maybe ESY is just going to be for that skill. And maybe that's why there's going to be walk-in services where you're just going to bring your child to school twice a week over the summer, or have tutoring type minutes because that skill was just developed. Again, lots of creative solutions. Just know that it's not just for regression only. All right, let's talk about placement. Just so you know, guys, we are getting close, right, to our hour, which then we would say, okay, it's time for Q&A. But I want you to encourage you, if you have questions, if you have thoughts, if you have, oh my gosh, I never knew that, like my school said, if you are having any of those moments, please put them in the Q&A box so I can chat with you and address that as we continue through here. All right, remember, special education is a service, not a place. It is a service. So we don't go to special education, we receive special education services. It's a language change that can be really helpful in how everybody's thinking about it. Placement. Least restrictive environment I have there is number 3, but I just want to lead with that just for a second to know that when I talk about placement, I'm talking about where the services are going to be received, which is often referred to as LRE. But the first thing I want to make sure, again, remember I have the wheel and I'm going through and I'm saying, okay, first thing I want to know, were there discussions about placement? Because many of you have experienced this where placement is not really fully discussed. It's often left to the very end of the IEP meeting. And it's just kind of like, well, based on what the IEP is, we're recommending this classroom. Okay. And that's the whole discussion. It's important for there to be a discussion about placement prior to the IEP meeting. I did not say determine placement. I said discussion about placement prior to the IEP meeting, or at least then during the IEP meeting, you're going to have to say, thank you for the information. Like, I need to digest this if that's the first time that you're hearing it. Number two, I also want parents to observe the placement. This is like one of those, oh my gosh, but my school said I'm not allowed to come in and observe, or I'm not allowed to shop for a placement. I've heard a lot of administrators who have said to parents, and if you're an administrator here, I'm not picking on you. I'm just letting you know, like, you're not one who says this. There's some of your colleagues that are saying this, which is why it's hard. There's a hard dynamic in special education because it's almost like one person says something and then it just gets assumed that everybody does this. And it's not true. But there's a lot of admins that when a parent says, I want to see a variety of placements, they say, well, you don't get to shop for placement. Like, you don't get to go around shopping for schools. Like, the team's going to make a recommendation. And that's not right, because a parent needs to be an equal member of the IEP team, which means that if the team has knowledge about a placement, a classroom, a school, and the parent does not have that knowledge, how are they supposed to participate in that conversation? They can't. So parent observation, really important. Least restrictive environment. So we're supposed to always be in the least restrictive environment. I never, ever want you to feel like least restrictive environment for your child or for your students is the same as somebody else. Meaning that if I look at the typical definition of least restrictive environment, we have the most restrictive environment and the least restrictive environment. Being a least restrictive would be general education with no supports, and then most restrictive, we could say residential placement. And then there's everything in between. So we could assume something like a public school with a self-contained classroom where most of the education would take place in a classroom with a special education teacher. We could say that a therapeutic day school, so a non-public school with all students who have IEPs, that this would be more restrictive. However, there are many cases where, and I'm going to use my brother as an example again, the public school was actually very restrictive for him. And you could say, oh, Catherine, but that's like decades ago. It's still happening right now. I just tell this story because it's close to my heart, but I can tell you it's still happening right now, where we can say that a public school can be more restrictive. But then once my brother went to a therapeutic day school, he actually was able to navigate the entire campus on his own. He was safe. He was able to really grow his independence in a way that did not work for him in a public school. He was actually more restrictive. So that's why this least restrictive environment, we really need to look at how is a child really going to grow to be prepared for further education, employment, and independent living. And what is that environment going to look like to help that child get there? Now, with that, we move on to inclusion planning. How many of you have ever seen an inclusion plan put into an IEP? Most likely none, because it's something that I force into IEPs. And by force, I don't mean I'm not strong-holding anybody into this, but I force it in a way of, if we're going to do this, if we're going to have inclusive opportunities, which I always say, inclusion is an experience, not a place. Inclusion is an experience, not a place. A child should feel included from the minute that they walk on a campus till the minute that they leave. Inclusion can happen in a hallway, in the library, at PE class, at recess, in a classroom, in a special ed classroom, in a general education classroom, any classroom. It should feel inclusive. No child should feel like they're, not included in that experience. But to do that, we have to have some planning. So for example, I'll give you a quick one here. When I was doing some consulting work for a child who the district brought me in to help make the environment more inclusive for a child, things were not going well when it came to inclusion, and the parents were not very happy at all, it was absolutely, things were not going well. But for example, this child communicated using pictures. And so the child often carried around a picture book of things. Low tech worked great for this child, and that was the communication style. When the child was in any of the academic rooms, any of the special education, there was a couple of different special education rooms. When they're any of the special education rooms, there was a visual schedule. Like you walk in and you're like, oh, I'm going to do this, this, this. Okay, I got it. Now, when the child went into a general education room or the art room or PE or music, there was no visual set of expectations for the child. So the child came into the room, didn't know what was going on, made their own kind of just plan their own plan for that period of what's going to happen, which then was they were told they were disruptive and then they had to leave the environment. They didn't know their expectations. So we had to get visual schedules and visual communication boards put into every classroom. Somebody here just says, yes, I have for my son, a developmental pediatrician put it in writing about 3 years ago. It made a big difference. So yes, so getting some things into writing. Also just keep in mind, with the developmental pediatrician, we like to have things from outside providers and then we get them integrated into educational language. So as I read that out loud, I just don't want everybody to think if you run to a developmental pediatrician and they put something in writing that the school has to do it. That's not how it works. There's a whole different process in there. Some teams look at things and they're like, yep, got it. And other ones will kind of pull the law where it says, that they just have to consider what an outside person has said, but they don't actually have to do it. Let's see. What do I do when a case manager is pushing for an autism diagnosis, but the developmental pediatrician and several other medical professionals have advised that the child is not on the autism spectrum? Okay, hear me real clear. I love that this is going into this conversation, okay? There is a difference, huge difference. So it's kind of like, and I don't know if you're the mom or the provider who's asking this, like a support person in the, but I just hear me when I say this. There is an educational eligibility and there's a medical diagnosis. Your child, any child, you may never qualify underneath a medical diagnosis, but under the educational eligibility, that checklist of things for anything, OHI, specific learning disability, autism, for any category, your child might meet the educational checklist. So it's not saying your child medically has autism, that would go in the medical world. This happens all the time. We get a medical diagnosis of autism, and then the school's like, no way. Or we have the school say educational autism, and the doctors are like, no way. Here's the thing. Paperwork is paperwork. And I'm going to say something that a lot of people, they get hung up in the paperwork. Here's the bottom line. I will do whatever needs to be done in paperwork to get a child the services that they need. I actually learned that from my mom years ago. And again, this has not changed. I mean, I've been through all the school. I've been going on. And some of the things that I watched my mom do from Parent Instinct, she has a high school diploma, guys. She was the first generation of advocates. Okay. And so when she was like, I don't care what you put on the paperwork, just get my son the education that he needs. So I would be asking the team, like, is having this eligibility category, don't call it a diagnosis, having this eligibility category going to achieve anything different for my child versus having like an OHI eligibility or whatever other eligibility might be? Is there anything in there? Chances are it's no. That's probably just the most kind of forward facing checklist that they're looking at, saying, okay, this one works, like to get eligibility. I'm going to tell you another thing just from the inside, a little secret from the inside. Nobody looks at eligibility. Like as a teacher, like we might glance at it, but we don't provide a student supports based on their eligibility. Once a child is eligible for services, we build an IEP however they need it. I don't care what the eligibility is. I'm just going to build the IEP, and then I'm going to provide that IEP to the child. So is the recording going to be provided? Yes. Let's see. Go on here. Let's see. I think I grabbed that one. All right. The child's whole IEP team agreed that my child needed a one-to-one para. His whole IEP was written as if he had one. After the meeting, the school district denied the one-on-one meeting. Is this allowed? Well, it depends. If the team agreed and did not put it in writing that the child was going to receive a one-on-one, then yes, it cannot be provided because it was not put in writing. It absolutely is like the rug was pulled out from underneath you because it wasn't put in writing. If it was put in writing, then no, the district cannot make a unilateral decision to remove a service. What I would say is you're going to have to go back through the paper trail and see where was it exactly documented. The other thing is I'm going to give a quick tip on getting a one-on-one, and this might be a great way for you to get through this situation. Most kids don't need an IEP, don't need a one-on-one for 100% of their day. That doesn't mean they don't need adult supervision. What I'm saying is if I'm the teacher and I'm working with your child, do they need a one-on-one sitting next to them while I'm working one-on-one with your child? Like that would be 2-to-1. Do they need a 2-to-1? Most of the time, the answer is no. I'm not saying there's not times that that's not needed. Most of the time, that's not true. So I would be looking at the data. If the district said no, I would, and it's not in writing where everybody agreed yes, I would be looking at the data saying, okay, well, then we need to make sure my child has a one-on-one during unstructured activities, large group activities, that transitions between classrooms. Like, what are the areas? So maybe it's not written as a full-time one-on-one, but there's so much documented that that your child has the support that they need throughout the school day. So that's another approach. Let's see. Let's have, how strict are timelines? Once the annual meeting happens, do you have to respond within 30 days? Every timeline in every state is basically different. Now, there's a federal timeline on things, okay? The state timelines, the state can come in with timelines and say that it has to be the same or better than the federal timeline. So like the same or shorter. So depending, when you say an annual meeting, do you have to respond within 10 days? I can tell you in Illinois, you have to respond within 10, you said within 30 days. In Illinois, it's within 10 days. In other states, there's no timeline. In some states, you can agree to part of the IEP and not the other part of the IEP. In most states, you don't even sign an IEP. Once you sign your child into special education, the only thing you're signing is an attendance sheet, and that there's kind of a process after the IEP meeting if you don't agree with something, but you don't actually sign the IEP. Like that's a whole other, kind of strategy session for us to have there. But basically, how strict are they? They're strict when they need to be. But what's the punishment if somebody doesn't follow the timeline? Ugh. That's where we get into the, so again, that depending on what we're talking about, what specific situation and what we need to hold them accountable for, it can look different. Let's see. When goals are achieved with related services, speech, for example, data is never provided. What type of data can a parent request? Okay, on your child's IEP goal, their exact IEP goal, there's an area that says how the data will be collected. Now, this happens a lot in speech. Had it happen to one of my clients where we said, we'd like to see the data. She said, what data? And so I pulled the IEP, I looked and I said, well, it says here that you're going to have a log of observations and data charting. That's what was listed. And she was like, oh, it's going to take me a few days to get that together. In other words, it really didn't exist. And she was going to do the best that she could from her notes to put it together to have that done. Here's the thing. She had never been asked before for it. So if I'm going to ask for data for any IEP goal, so this is for everybody. If I'm going to ask for data for any IEP goal, I'm going to go to the IEP and to that goal, and I'm going to see exactly what is documented as the data collection method for that goal. All right, inclusion planning, it's got to be planned. Transportation needs to be addressed in the IEP also. I did provide you guys with an inclusion checklist, things for the student, things for the teacher, parent, and then for the classroom overall. Now, collaboration. I believe this is our last section here. So let's see if the IEP team is being collaborative. Were the meeting logistics shared? early enough? And were they convenient for everybody to get there? Meeting logistics. Did you get a draft IEP? I don't want a full written IEP before the IEP meeting. That would be predetermination. But did you get a draft IEP so you could look over the current data? See, that's something that's not going to change from the time the draft is made to when the IEP meetings happen. Getting reports on current data is absolutely valid in your draft IEP. Some states require a draft IEP, some don't, some don't. Some who do require it don't enforce it. I mean, there's all different things that happen here. I also want to know, has your IEP team been forward focused? That includes you. This is where we call ourselves out a little bit. Are we looking at this is where we're at and this is where we need to go? Yep, a bunch of junk has happened in the past, but this is where we're at. This is where we need to go. If you have things that you need to deal with about the past, that should be at a different meeting. We don't want to kind of suck up the whole meeting talking about all the problems and all the things from the past. We need an IEP meeting to be more like a think tank, a brainstorm session of like, we have the data, we have the proposed goals. What is this going to look like? Is everything prioritized? Meaning, parents, when you sent in that parent educational concerns letter, did we prioritize your concerns? Are there other staff members that had priorities like that they're really worried about something? Did we prioritize that, or did we just kind of go through and check the boxes and move on? And also, were there no surprises? There should never be surprises at an IEP meeting. If there's a surprise, you can absolutely say, can you please write that down? It's the first time I'm hearing it. We can come back to it later. All right, I have another question here. What are parents' rights and what is the best approach if you find out a service is not happening? For example, if a child's supposed to be in a co-taught science class and he informed me that the special ed teacher was supposed to be in his class was out for over a month and the school did not get a sub. Well, I would first say, what impact did that have on your child's learning? Can we prove that it had a negative impact on there? And if so, what would be a reasonable way to address that impact and try to close whatever gap was created? So would that be extra time with the special education teacher? Would that be just what would you want to be the end result? Because that's where I'm going to say everybody wants something different. And I don't know that, right? The child. So sometimes we're just looking at, well, we need to make sure now the child's lost in class and, hasn't been participating fully. So I need the special ed teacher to make sure XYZ is happening. And I want documentation. I want parent communication. I want weekly updates now. Maybe it's just adding in that accountability piece. So a lot of different things can happen there, but it's really what do you want as an end result? Or we've got somebody else who said 2 years ago, the speech therapist left. I was not aware of it. Left in November. Wasn't aware of it until February when we came in for yearly IEP meetings. You're not alone. I use this as an example all the time, and people think that I'm like making it up, like I'm exaggerating. Like, oh, you found out months later the speech therapist isn't coming. And this happens for other related services also. I don't know why speech always comes up, but it does. That's when I became aware. The case manager told me they were in the process of replacing the therapist. I followed up a month later, still nothing. I reached out again and asked why. Why were we not informed? His speech therapy has been stopped for so long. It's affecting him. Absolutely. So there should be compensatory education in that. Compensatory education, again, that's something that's too big of a process for me to go through all of the pieces here, but just know that if a service has not been provided for an extended amount of time, so let's just say that altogether a child missed a total of 60 hours of speech, 60 hours of school-based speech services. I might negotiate with the school. And again, when I work with parents, I teach them to negotiate with the school. A lot of time I'm helping ghostwrite letters, or the master IP coaches that I train, they're ghostwriting letters. I might settle for 20 hours of private clinical speech therapy as compensation for 60 hours of missed speech, because missed speech at school is going to be in a group setting. There's transitions that happen. It's not as intensive as a private clinical setting. There's a huge difference between clinical services and educational based services. So I might negotiate and say, Okay, I'll take my kid to private speech, at, after school, we want 20 hours paid for, and then we're going to move forward from this point forward and come up with a ratio that would work. Again, that may or may not be an appropriate ratio based on your situation, but that's a possibility. Okay. Just want to share here. If you guys are like, whoa, this was a lot of information. I would love to know how to do this. I would love to know how to do this for my own family. I would love to know how to help others do this. That's called the Master IEP Coach Mentorship. It's where I'm live every week. You get surrounded by fellow Master IEP coaches. If you choose to run this as a business, I teach you how to really work with clients and find clients and network and build a beautiful business that you can work from home. We also gather once a year in Tampa, which is where I'm located at, and collaborate as Master IEP coaches. I do have a link in your download, but you can also go to masteriepcoach.com/mentorship. That's how you would get enrolled into the program. Let's see. Should we be receiving the results of data collection for the IEP goals? Okay, so the law says that you should receive progress reports for your child that relate to their IEP goals at the same interval as report cards. That's when you should receive data collection. Now, what you're most likely going to get is a progress report that says making progress, making progress, making progress, making progress, or maybe one says that they're not making progress. And you're going to have a conversation that during progress reports, you expect to have the data collection, that's an expectation that you want to actually see the data. So you're going to have to follow up through that. Let's see. Great information. Thank you so much. You're very, very welcome. All right, guys. It's like, this is it. This is like the final call, last call of the night. Any other questions, concerns, thoughts, aha moments? Oh my goodness, I need to check this. I didn't know this, or I have this question. Any of those thoughts that you want to put in the Q&A, now is your time for that. Oh, you're so very welcome. So glad it was helpful for you.